Yeah, I couldn't wait. Hey, it's Romania Black, and yeah, you can't just leave off on episode 5 and expect me to not go ahead and get into episode 6. I mean, I did take a couple days break, I'm not gonna lie. I wanted to read more from the book that I've gotten, which is The Last Eunuch in China, which is getting to be pretty interesting. But I wanted to read a little bit more on that first before I dived into episode 6 to talk with you all about it. But yeah, our first two-barter, and it's this early on, and MaoMao's like, well, something's gonna happen, but we don't know exactly what. I think Jinshi has suspicions that something's gonna go down, and MaoMao's like, I hope something doesn't go down, but... And there's something maybe to do with the food. We don't know yet. It's gonna be something. But I'm really excited. I've got 2 dogs at my feet. I've got a blanket in my lap because it's a little bit like one of those rainy, gloomy days. And so it seemed like a perfect time to watch this episode. But I've got some comments. Thank you guys so much for pouring in on the comments, talking about the series. I am really falling in love with this series, and you all are kind of expressing the same. Someone said that this was a great successor to Freerin, which I finished a while ago and caught up with, and I agree. I feel like Freerin and MaoMao, they would get along great. They'd be besties. They'd be out in the woods looking for mushrooms. It'd be a great time. But I want to get straight to those comments. Holly Mai 9, and Rhett the Best both talk about how MaoMao translates to cat, and which goes along with her cat-like personality and like the little animations that they do. That all makes sense now. So thank you for that. And then Rhett the Best talks about how a lot of European doctors also did the idea of doing the self-harm where they use themselves as literal guinea pigs for medicine. And they would test on themselves, not only because it was more ethical than perhaps testing on another person or an animal, but also for the legality. Whereas if something went wrong, the family of the person that you experimented on couldn't sue you because you were testing on yourself. So I thought that was really important to mention. I thought that was a pretty good thing to bring up. Saki TQQLYW points out the author of the novel supposedly claimed that this was set in the Tang Dynasty in China, but the author was attacked by some Korean group. Now, this is according to a commenter. I don't know if it's true or not. So the animation team altered and made it kind of a mishmash to avoid conflict. I don't know. At this point, there's been a lot of people try to point out like which dynasties it's drawing influence from, and I do agree with a lot of people, that a lot of commenters, that it's just kind of a hodgepodge. I mean, obviously, it's drawing influence from specific Chinese dynasties. You've got the emperor, you have the concubines, you have the imperial, the forbidden city. You've got all of it right there. It's clearly drawing from history. They just got to put that disclaimer so that the government doesn't get sued. So that's pretty much it. So the government doesn't get mad. And it's fine. I just think it's interesting. And then Anime Annie points out that Jinshi did, in episode 2, steal an aphrodisiac off of the plate because there's one left than when you looked back. So last week, whenever the rumor was going around about the servant being discovered having an affair with the concubine, it seems that it would add weight to MaoMao suspecting that it was Jinshi. Now that means that Jinshi gave the aphrodisiac to the woman as a means of testing her, being like, well, if you're loyal to the emperor, you're not gonna mess around. So yeah, here's this aphrodisiac. You can save it for when you're with the emperor. And she gave it to a public servant, which means she was basically cheating on the emperor. And basically doing what Jinshi's supposed to do, which is outing all the traitors in the house. So that's rather interesting. Also, Anime Annie points out that Gaoshun's VA is Konishi Katsuyuki, who is Hiragi from Bleach. And I don't remember Hiragi having that deep, sensual voice. Maybe I need to go back and rewatch Bleach. I was like, oh, has it been a while? But he also plays Tengen in Demon Slayer, and Tengen does have that same deep voice, so maybe he was younger when he played Hiragi in Bleach. I mean, obviously he was younger, but maybe he was really young, and his voice just naturally deepened as he got older. Maybe he's been holding out on us until Demon Slayer, and now? I don't know, but I was like, oh, cool, that's great. So yes, thank you all for those comments. That's really awesome. And then, so I've been reading this book, The Last Eunuch in China, to glean some information about being a eunuch in the Imperial Palace in the Forbidden City, because Jinshi obviously is a character I really like, and I'm just, kind of gleaming some what his life might have been like and the influence leading up to it. This section here, when we last left off, Sun Yaoting unfortunately could not go work for the emperor as planned because the emperor abdicated the throne. So instead, he goes to Zai Tao, who is one of his uncles, I think like his 7th uncle, and he stays in his house. And it's really interesting, basically because Sun Yaoting, he's young. I think he's around 7 or 8 at the time. This is all going on. He, like, Zai Tao kind of takes him in, this uncle, and he has a wife. He has several kids, which we'll talk about that here in a second. But he kind of takes in Yao Ting and sort of teaches him. He realizes he can write, so he has him do calligraphy lessons with him. He starts to he's really into this certain type of physical exercise and martial arts, so he gets Sun Yao Ting into it as well. Kind of he just wanted to get him involved in what he was doing. But Zai Tao is a very interesting character because he is very into the arts, and he does lots of opera and theatrical performances and puts on plays for people, which is interesting. But he also liked playing female roles in the plays, which was very interesting too. And I'm not saying, he had a wife and he had several kids, and never in this book does it make any reference of him trying to be with a man necessarily, but he did want to play the female roles because of the drama and the storyline behind them. So I found it really interesting because it kind of, in a interesting way, Sun Yao Ting in the book doesn't really, and the author doesn't really use it as kind of a breakdown of gender construct or anything. But to me, it kind of read that here's this man in 1911 that was hosting, he's one of the most influential people in his social circles, hosting these parties. And for him to be able to choose to play the female roles and to incorporate this, and everybody was like, oh yeah, sure. It definitely, for a modern context, and for the fact that he was doing it without any statement about gender and things like that. And maybe there's a whole nother stuff about Zai Tao that Sun Yao Ting doesn't want to talk about, that you all know about, that I don't. But to me, it was interesting that this person who positions himself as a cis heterosexual individual was playing around with gender roles and different performance styles and things. And I thought that was interesting. I don't know how exactly to describe it, but I was I thought the story was going to take a turn and we find Sun Yao Ting reveals that he, was having an affair with a man or something. No, that's not the case at all. Or at least it doesn't seem to be. Now, there was a eunuch that did work for them that went off and didn't tell Zai Tao, and Zai Tao seems really upset about it. And the tone of it kind of maybe implies that they were really close, but it doesn't ever come out and say anything. And maybe Sun Yao Ting just didn't know, and he was like, it's not my place to say. I didn't know. It's just, here's what I do. I thought it was very, very fascinating. And for Jinshi's character, who portrays himself as kind of being, he looks kind of effeminate, but is perhaps not in nature because he seems to like MaoMao. I thought that was really interesting. And the whole thing of them being eunuchs kind of adds this stereotype to it that I think that Sun Yao Ting is kind of hinting at, was not necessarily the case or tied to it. So it's fascinating. But as we've left off, we're in this part of the book. I'm going slowly but surely through it so I can talk about a part each episode that I'm doing this. Right now, he's basically hit a stagnant point where he's been working for Zai Tao and he's like, it's just not going anywhere. So he's seemingly found a way to maybe get out of the uncle's house and go to the Imperial Palace and try to get in there. One thing that is interesting, though, is that at some point during this, they talk about that the Imperial Palace had a specific rule that in order to get into the palace, you had to have what they call a pigtail. It was like a little ponytail that drug down and you kept growing it out. One of the high eunuchs that was high ranking in the Imperial Palace had a big long ponytail that draped down to their heels to the floor. And it was that was a big sign and a symbol of your power there. And so at one point, Zai Tao, he doesn't want Sun Yao Ting to leave, or he's afraid. He sees he's growing the pigtail and he's like, oh, you're going to leave me. And he makes him cut it off. And it's and this kid is like, oh my God, you've ruined my chances of ever getting in. And one of the eunuchs says, hey, we've all had it cut off at some point. you just let it grow back and then you can try again. He's just trying to keep you here because he wants you to stay and he likes you here. So it was a very interesting moment, right? But another part was that they make a point that in the Imperial Palace, they talk about how Zai Tao, when he writes the name of the leader, he leaves a character out. And at first, Sun Yao Ting corrects him, but then the mistress, the wife of Zai Tao, she's like, oh, no, we leave that character out because it's designating that that's the emperor's name. And if you had been in the Imperial Palace and you'd included that character, they would have beheaded you. And he was like, oh. So it's like there's all these very strict rules in the Imperial Palace for eunuchs. And if you do one step out of line, it could end your life. And Zai Tao is trying to teach him that, to be like, yeah, I know you want to go to the Imperial Palace and I know you want to work your way up, but there's a lot of rules and you're pretty naive. And if you step out of line, it could kill you. And it's like, oh. So it's very, very interesting. I'm enjoying it so far. It looks like Sun Yao Ting is going to try to go to the Forbidden City next. So for episode 7, I'm going to hopefully read that part and be able to talk to you all about it. But I'm super excited, though, to get into this episode. I've talked way too long, but I poured myself a cup of coffee, got my blanket, I'm all set, and we're all ready to go. So with that being said, we're not going to waste any more time. I've made sure that I've got the Japanese subtitles on. And we are going to start the Apothecary Diaries, episode 6. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Well, that was an interesting episode. So we haven't solved the firework thing. That's still going on. They're going to make it a 3rd part. Fine. Fair. I'm not going to lie. I kind of fell down the rabbit hole this episode. When I got off this reaction, I started to research a couple of things, and I kind of fell down the rabbit hole. So this may be a long discussion, and I may go on some tangents that kind of go off the beaten path, but I swear it will wrap back around. So let's get in here and talk about this episode, mainly with our dear Li Shu. So we're going to talk about her first, our girl. There's no sense of decency, that she's so picky with her food. And it's not like it's going to kill her or anything. Well, it could. Ha ha ha. It could kill her this episode, especially if she has an allergic reaction to it. You know, like some people are allergic to shellfish. She's allergic to a certain type of mackerel, and she could face allergies that could kill her. I feel like the fact that she is wary of such things points out that she's smarter than she looks. She knows that something goes wrong when she eats certain things, so she's like, I'm not going to hurt myself. So, and honestly, some of these ladies in waiting, I'm like, you're supposed to be protecting her, and if she doesn't want to eat the food, I don't think I'd make her eat the food. But the thing of it is, she's 14, as we come to find out, and so they probably look down upon her because of her age, right? She's not as quote-unquote experienced as the other concubines. So first things first, I felt really bad for them throughout this episode because on the surface, when you're like, oh, they have all these layers on, why would they be cold during this event? Well, if you've ever been out in the early spring and there's a cold wind, unless you've got a big old coat on or some fur or something, yeah, you're probably going to be freezing. So I'm usually a very cold-natured person. I get cold easily. So I would be hunkered down by those hand warmers, like trying my best, but it was quite an ordeal with the cold. And the wind was just so much. I like that all the other ladies in waiting, they all have their arms around MaoMao like they're protecting her. I love how defensive and protective they are of MaoMao when our girl really doesn't need it. She's doing all right. And MaoMao's like, why couldn't we get a tent? Why could we not get a tent? Why was this not an option? You'd think. So they basically have all of the ladies in waiting and all of the concubines laid out, stretched out with the emperor there. And there's 2 seats on either side. There's the dowager who's watching one of the babies. And then there is where his brother would be. But his brother seems absent. It seems like he was there, but he's left. And he seems sickly, apparently. He doesn't get out much. So I got very Secret Garden vibes. If you've not watched The Secret Garden, that's okay. What I mean by that is I wonder if at some point MaoMao, because we're talking about the younger brother being sick, at one point is MaoMao going to have to like try to figure out what's wrong with him and like help and that's gonna be like a big ordeal. Like it's one thing to be taste testing poisons for the concubines, but in all honesty, yeah, the concubines, I wouldn't exactly label them as expendable, but there's a lot of them and he could get more. But the, second in line after the emperor is kind of a big deal. So if MaoMao gets caught up trying to figure out something like that, that's a pretty tall order. So that's going to be interesting. But yeah, I like that all the eunuchs are like kind of color coded in their outfits. And then Jinshi gets to wear all the colors because he's the special one. So interesting. I like, we have our dancers. Basically, the Fire Nation from Avatar showed up to do some line dancing for us and have the drums and everything. So yeah, the Dowager's the one watching baby Lily, and she's beautiful, very much so. So they basically say she's really young and that she's probably, I'm going to guess she's like 15 or maybe even 12 years older than the emperor. The way that they talked, when they wouldn't come out loud and say how old she was, I was like, oh, she's 12 when she had him. Probably. So, which you can think what you want about that. And I know if I complain about it, someone will comment, well, that was just the way that the history was. And I was like, oh. Still doesn't mean I can't feel disgusted by it. Thank you. I don't think anybody under the age of 16 should be having a child, but I don't even think anybody under the age of 18 honestly should be having a child. But at least if you're 16, you're a little bit more developed. But that's all I'm going to say about that because I know how the comment section will be. So yeah, it is what it is. But I do like and appreciate kind of the garden party setup. And then Gokyoku, she looks so like not bothered. She's like, MaoMao's got this. We're all good. Aduo, who is the eldest of all of them, I put up here, Gokyoku and Lihua look like they're in their 20s. Mid 20s, early 20s. Li Shu is 14 and then Aduo is 35. So she's about my age. She's the older one. She seems interesting. I'm curious about her. So I'm fascinated about how she is. I wondered if Lihua was pregnant because she seems pretty confident there and she seems like she's regaining her health. I wonder if she's pregnant and just kind of glowing in it, but who knows? Meanwhile, they're all taken out. I like that MaoMao's like, oh, Jinshi's not here. Where's he at? Where's the glitter boy? I like what she calls him, right? So the whole idea behind this is to instill a rivalry between the concubines. And MaoMao's like, okay. And he's like, that's the Empress Dowager. Yeah. Aw, it's so cute that she's with the little baby Lily. She's very youthful. Yeah, she was young. She gave birth to the emperor and she tells her the age and she's like, she must have worked really hard to give birth. MaoMao's like, oh, that seems a bit much. But she has 2 children, the emperor and his younger brother. And the younger brother is the one that's too sick to leave the house. She's like, I thought he was here a few moments ago, which seems a little suspicious to me. So we'll have to put a pin in that. Then we cut to the maids and they're just like getting called basic by Lihua's maids, which I find hilarious because if you look at how the jewelry and the ornate designs between the maids, Gokyoku's maids, they have like all of the beautiful like ornate like ornaments in their hair and extra jewelry. They look way less basic than Lihua's maids. They just have like a gobstopper in front of their heads and matching earrings. Like they barely have any jewelry on at all. What? And so I like that our one girl here, she gets so fierce. And MaoMao's like, well, what are they doing? Yinghua. Like the proxy war begins. And they're like, well, I guess you can't help but seeing you hired that ugly girl. And I'm like, MaoMao is like not ugly at all. She's like really pretty. And MaoMao's like, are they talking about me? And she's like, what did you say? I love that they all get riled at her on MaoMao's behalf. And MaoMao's like, well, didn't we have a lot of fun at the Crystal Pavilion? Which then we go to this scene where MaoMao like kabedons one of the girls up against the wall. And then, yeah. And then she's just like, oh, well, I'll have to do things to your body that you'd never tell your father about. I'm like, girl, what? I'm like, excuse me? I did not know MaoMao went that way. And I don't think she did. I think that she's just like trying to intimidate her like a man would. And it is effective. But I'm like, MaoMao, you're not Utina. Or are you? I don't know. I think it's interesting that MaoMao adopts a lot of intimidation tactics that you would normally, like doing the whole kabedon against the wall and threatening her like that you would see normally like a guy do. But MaoMao takes it on and it is still effective. And she's like, oh, that was just some courtesan style humor. And I'm like, courtesan style humor, girl. And I'm sure that somebody in the brothel might have thought that was funny, but you know, she's in the Imperial Palace. They take it a little differently. My favorite part about this is that she looks over. Now, she makes this gesture with her mouth like she's doing this. Maybe, I feel like maybe she's just doing it so that they can't see her expression all the way. Maybe I'm not hip with the slang with the kids. I don't exactly know what the deal with her mouth is and why she does this, except if she's smiling so that only they'll see, and that's supposed to be intimidating. It's still a scary face regardless. But I love how the other ladies in waiting, they're like, poor MaoMao, are you all right? They bullied you. And you're like, your distrust of a man made you put makeup on your face. And then you were stuck with those other ladies in waiting that were mean and bullied you. And only Master Jinshi's benevolent to her. I just love they defend her. And MaoMao is like the one capable of helping herself. So then they all get onto the other lady being like, you're wearing a crimson dress here and blah, 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 blah. And it's like the virtuous consort is 14 and arrived later. And the pure consort's 35 and has been here the longest. No wonder they don't get along. And they used to be mother and daughter-in-law. So she's like, wait a minute, how's that work? And they're like, well, this was getting into some backwater hillbilly family trees. I was just like, yep. The whole time the one maiden waiting was talking, I was like, yeah, I've seen that back home. I was like, yeah, bring on the complicated family trees. I'm used to it. So, okay. So we have the way that the tree works is that we originally had the dowager over here, and she was with the old emperor. And then they had the current emperor. But what we find out is the current emperor is over here with her. This emperor had been with Li Shu 5 years ago when she was 9. Which is, I was kind of surprised by, but we're going to go down the rabbit hole here in just a second. And so before was the emperor's concubine. And that would have been when Aduo was, but the previous emperor passed away. And so the previous emperor's concubine left the palace and became the current emperor's concubine. So they figure it was Aduo when she was 30, and they're like, well, no, flip that back around. Li Shu was 9, but yeah. He's like a concubine at 9. That's crazy. And like being a mother-in-law at 9 years old. And then they realized that Li Shu, since she was with the original emperor and he's with her, she technically is referred to like as her mother-in-law, which is crazy, right? I mean, I've had people whose uncles were younger than they were, so wrap your mind around that. But I've seen similar situations happen. It's kind of crazy. And MaoMao's like, oh, well, this is crazy. So that brings a lot of perspective on why Li Shu is the way that she is. Like, why she's all flirty around Jinshi. Hell, she wasn't originally with the emperor. She was with his dad, and she was 9. And she's kind of like, whatever. I'm just here, and I'm 14. What do you want me to do? But I kind of went down the rabbit hole, okay? So I went down the rabbit hole, and there was a concubine from way back in like, oh, you know, the 1st century. And so it was from like 690. She ruled between 690 and 705 for she was born in February of 624. Her name was Wu Zetian. Her personal name was Wu Zhao, and she was the Empress of China from 660 to 705. ruling first through others and then in her own right. So she actually became like a dowager empress herself. And her story is fascinating. So she was the only female sovereign in history of China that was widely regarded as legitimate, and had a 45-year reign in which China grew larger, becoming one of the great powers in the world. Its culture and economy revitalized, and corruption in the court was reduced, and she was eventually removed from power during a coup and died a few months later at the age of 81. So woman lived a crazy life, but I went down the rabbit hole with her because Wu was really interesting to me, because I was like, well, how did this even happen? So she originally started, if we get on this right. So she originally was this concubine for this emperor when she was 14. And so if I get my stuff all right, she basically kind of started out as a low-ranking concubine, and she was mainly more like a secretary with the emperor. She was only 14, so she kind of was just one of the lowly concubines and sort of worked her way up the corporate ladder, as it would be. And so after the one emperor's death, rather than entering into retirement, which was customary for royal widows, and not interfering in the government, you know, which according to the emperor's law at the time, you had to reach the age of 17 before you could rule by yourself, Wu broke tradition and took acquisition of power, refusing to allow any of her sons to rule. And she took the throne in 690, officially changing the name of the country from Tang to Zhou, and changing the name of the royal family from Li to Wu, and had this formal ceremony to crown herself as emperor. So bitch like took over, and her stuff is so fascinating to me. But she originally started out, let me find the rest. This is like a huge article. She was taken in as an imperial concubine, and she continued her education while she was there. And so what I loved about her was that she was this really, she's not like Li Shu in the story. She was super, or the Li Shu that we know so far, but she was super gung-ho and like really hardcore, like, I'm gonna go to the palace. And she kind of reminded me of MaoMao a little bit, because in the text that they cite, she told her mother, she's like, I'm gonna go become the empress, the emperor's wife, so bye. And I'm like this headstrong 14-year-old. And so the emperor dies in 649 when she's like not even 20 yet, and his youngest son, Li Zi, whose mother was the main wife, succeeded him as Emperor Gaozong. Now, apparently Wu had an affair with him, with the emperor, had an affair with the son before the emperor died. So girl, which makes sense, they were around the same age. So apparently the emperor had 14 sons, but none by her. Apparently there was rumors he had tried to be sexual with her, but they never had any children. So he had 14 sons, but she was not one that produced any children. And so it was tradition at the time for, if there was a concubine that didn't have any kids with the emperor, they would basically go be a nun in a convent after his death. But what ended up happening was Gaozong got her to come back and basically fell in love with her. And then it became this big old mess. And it just shows her like rising through power. And then she ended up having like several kids with him once she was like in her 20s. She had several kids with them. The thing that's most interesting is that she had a son named Li Hong, then another son named Li Jian, and then she had a daughter. But what was interesting was that her daughter died shortly after her birth, and there was evidence that she was strangled. And come to find out that one of the other concubines was accused of killing her. It's like it was this big, crazy thing. So it goes into a lot of detail about this, but one of my favorite parts of this story about her is that she kind of, the way that she was favored by the older emperor before his death. He favored her, and that's why he kind of let her rise up through the ranks. And it said that Consort Wu at the time did not appear to be favored much by the emperor, though it appears that she did have sexual relations with him at one point. According to her own account, she once impressed the emperor with her fortitude. He had a horse that was named Lion Stallion, and it was so large and strong no one could get on its back. While a lady in waiting attending the emperor, she suggested to him, I need 3 things to subjugate the horse: an iron whip, an iron hammer, and a sharp dagger. I'll whip it with the iron whip, and if it does not submit, I'll hammer its head with the iron hammer, and if it still does not submit, I will cut its throat with the dagger. Bitch. And the emperor apparently praised her bravery, saying, do you believe that you are qualified to dirty my dagger? Which you can take in a lot of ways, I suppose. It's like, ah! So yeah, point being, as much as it is harrowing to me now for someone to be 14 years old and be a concubine for an emperor, as disgusting as that seems to me personally, the fact that this girl took that moment in time 1,000 years ago and said, no, I'm gonna make my lemonade out of lemons, let's go, and she ended up becoming the Empress of China, is wild to me. Like, you just look up Wu Zetian and Zetian and go check her stuff out. It is crazy. She has like a whole history, and I fell down a rabbit hole. But after reading that, I was like, okay, Li Shu, you can do this. You got this. You can make this work, girl. But I don't know if this anime, what route they're going to go to with Li Shu. I feel like she's definitely the most innocent out of all of them, seemingly. But she may also have the most stakes in causing damage, because what has she got to lose? You know, so it'll be interesting. She could be, if they're going to play historically with it, she could be a rebel rouser. Who knows? I do love, like, MaoMao has some giggles throughout this, which are really nice. And Li Shu definitely has a little bit of a brattiness to her, you know? She's just like, ugh, and walks by and, like, humps at them. And they're like, what's eating her gourd? But understandably, if she entered there at the age of 9, she's still young and impetuous and kind of immature. So, you know, what can you do? So they're like, yeah, I see that. And I like that they make note, because when they said she was the virtuous consort, I was thinking in my head, I'm like, wouldn't she wear white? But instead she wears like these pinks and reds to kind of like contrast with Gyoku, like trying to like clash with Lady Gyokyo, the precious consort. And she's like, maybe she can't read the room. I'm like, maybe she's doing it on purpose because she's trying to cause a scene and she don't give a fuck. That seems to be the impression that I get, right? She's like, I've been handed down from one emperor to the other. No shits are given on this day by Li Shu. I do love Lily. She's really cute. And grabbing at MaoMao, she's so adorable. So yeah, so they go back to the garden party. They see the ladies in waiting for Li Hua kind of struggling there in the cold. And again, for as crass and kind of like eccentric as MaoMao can be, she is kind-hearted. Like she very much is like, look, I'm not gonna take any bullshit off anybody, but I'm also not gonna be a petty bitch. Like, here, have some hand warmers. It's cold out. And the other ladies are just too scared to take them from her. And she's like, okay, whatever. So she's like, I even got Lady Gokyo's opinion or agreement to give them out. So then we have the hairpins, all right? And so there's several eunuchs giving hairpins to some of the ladies. And they're like, oh, well, it's how they try to recruit talented workers hidden in this flower garden. By giving these pairs out, by giving these hairpins out. And she's like, It has another hidden meaning, though. And she's blushing with the hidden meaning. Now, of course, MaoMao's not hearing the hidden meaning. And the one lady in waiting is trying so hard to tell her the hidden meaning. And MaoMao's like, not interested. And I'm like, I mean, here's the thing. We obviously know that the hairpins are used as a sign of affection from one person to the next. But there's probably another meaning with it as well, right? So I did look up a little bit with hairpins, and apparently Chinese women would take hairpins out of their hair and give it to their male fiancés, and then after the wedding, the husband would return the hairpin to their newlywed wife by placing it back in her hair. They're a love token, but why would eunuchs have all these hairpins? Could it be that they received them before they left the imperial palace or became eunuchs? I'm sure that they're going to give more explanation in the secret meaning as we go on, right? But they're obviously a sign of affection. My thing was that this one guy that she gets a hairpin from, he looks like Bokuto from IQ, only he has dark hair. He looks like a damn lapdog. Looks like a Labrador, human Labrador. But he has like a whole string of hairpins. And she's like, he's handing them out to everyone to make sure no servant feels ashamed, I guess. And I'm like, no, girl. So I wonder if there is, in fact, another meaning behind him giving out all the hairpins. Like, is it just like, you can go on a date with me? You know, maybe it's a sign that, oh, I've given you this token. You can exchange it for a free date with me, because he has several of them. I mean, it's not that he wants to get a bunch of girlfriends. It's a eunuch that's there in the palace, and they're courtesans or concubines or ladies in waiting for the emperor. My thing would be, maybe it's a sign that he wants to like court you or take you out to dinner. I don't know. He has several of them. Jinshi, I would not be surprised if Jinshi had a bunch of hairpins and they all look different. Or maybe they were all hairpins that were given to him by other women. We don't know. But she's like, he was like a dog. And they're like, oh, look at all these hairpins you're getting. Now, then you have Li Hua, who gives her the hairpin. And Li Hua's hairpin, we have the one dime a dozen hairpin that Labrador Man gave to MaoMao. Then you have, you know, Jinshi's hairpin that he gave her, that is a symbol of affection and his care for her. Then you have Li Hua, who gives her the other hairpin. And I don't think Li Hua is asking her out on any dates or anything. It's like Jinshi's a sign of affection, that she's like, thank you for all you've done for me. I'm going to give you this hairpin as a symbol of my affection for you, to thank you for your hard work to help me get back to health. Right? And of course, they're like, oh, Lady Gyokyo is going to be really jealous of y'all getting all these hairpins. And she's like, what am I going to do with all these? Now she has one for several. She's got a gold one, a silver one, a bronze one. She's got one for every occasion. She can wear one in her hair anytime. But then they bring out all the food. I do like that MaoMao like looks over and finds Gaoshun, and he's like, oh, he looks pretty good there. Like, she's like, look at him. I guess he's higher up than I thought. I don't ship MaoMao and Gaoshun at all, but I do find it fun and interesting that she like picks him out of a crowd and she's like, he's looking really good over there. I'm like, MaoMao, don't be giving Gaoshun any ideas. And then, you know, she finds the one other guy, the officer from earlier. He's at the very edge, but given his age, that's still impression. Like, he must be very young. And she's like, our glittering eunuch isn't there, but who cares? I'm like, bitch, you noticed he wasn't there. Don't think that you don't care. I'm sure she's curious where he's at. And I like that she calls him the glittering eunuch. He's our peacock. But yeah. Meanwhile, so she's there to taste all of the food to make sure that nothing is poisoned, right? That's her job as a taster. Of course, the other taster for the other concubine is like terrified because, again, these concubines could die at any minute. She's like, but I like the poison. She's like, I like the poison. She's like, I could have pufferfish and it would be good too. She's like, why can't they put pufferfish in a soup? It'd be great. So I'm a dum-dum and was like, you know, a masochist is somebody that takes pleasure in pain. And I was like, well, what type of person takes pleasure in poisons? Those are called addicts. Mm-hmm. I spent a good long time trying to figure that out. And then I had like a moment where I was like, oh, those are called addicts that like poison and have an addiction to it. Yes. Mm-hmm. So yeah, MaoMao's kind of that a little bit. Very Sherlock Holmes, very Moriarty the Patriot Sherlock Holmes in this moment. The fact that she likes the stinging, although there is a little bit of masochism there because she talks about liking the stinging sensation on the tongue. And I'm like, that's kind of painful. So that's kind of a little bit masochistic. I just love her face where she's like, I just want the poison things. I'm like, girl, nobody understands our poor MaoMao. So she talks about the vinegar, fish, and vegetable dish that's the emperor's favorite that looks kind of like coleslaw, but it has blueback in it, but it's jellyfish today. And then we see that Li Shu eats... I like that Gokyoku doesn't have any preferences, but Li Shu is eating the one that has fish in it, and she notices it, but she has to eat it. And the one lady in waiting behind her seems to know that she can't eat fish, even though she eats it. And she seems to be, like, smiling about that. And I'm like, girl, why are you smiling in public about your empress, about your concubine, possibly future empress, eating fish that could kill her? And MaoMao's like, well, that was weird. And that's when she tastes... I like that they're like, wow, one of those food tasters is really excitable. Like, she's having a great time with this. And meanwhile, poor Bokudo boy there is like, well, where's the fun in watching someone eat while they're terrified? And they're like, oh, well, you should watch her. She doesn't look terrified. And so our little sweet boy with his little hair flipped out, he looks a little bit entranced. And very entranced by MaoMao, who is, it's not how she reads things. And, you know, he gets all blushy around her because she looks just like ecstatic about the poison soup. Like and now her licking her lips is connecting back to the OP. Our girl likes poison and she likes finding it. And now she's found poison. And of course the guy is like blushing like, oh, this is kind of erotic. Her like licking her lips at it. And she's like, this is poison. She and Jinshi are a match made in heaven. They are a match because Jinshi and her, they both kind of delight in like pain and self-harming themselves, but it's under their control. So they are a match, right? The faces that they make when they're like satisfied and they know they're onto something. I'm like, oh, and MaoMao's like, well, finally, it's about damn time. Got some poison finally in the taste testing. And then she goes to throw it all up, and everybody's like, oh, are you sure? And the one guy ate it himself, the minister did, and then he passed out. So meanwhile, Jinshi, he's like, oh, this formal attire is too tight. So MaoMao, of course, assumes that Jinshi's been flirting with a guy behind the scenes, and that's how he got the other hairpin. But the reality is he was just messing with his collar because his outfit was too tight and he didn't like it. But that's not how she took it. And of course, he's going to be watching her to make sure she's okay. And she's like, oh, good day, Master Jinshi. Everything's great. And she's like, oh, shoot. She's like, I got too excited about the poison. I smiled at him. And he's like, what's wrong with you? So I need these two to communicate. And I know they will because we're only on episode 6. But I'm like, I can't wait until these two talk to each other and kind of figure things out and how each of them feels about poison and about their circumstances. I still wonder if Jinshi was possibly abused or assaulted himself, and that's why he got so, like, really, really emotional about MaoMao and what she said last episode. So we'll have to wait and see if we find out or not, but that's just my theory. My theory is Jinshi's gone through a similar experience, and feels bad for her because he doesn't want her to suffer through that, which is understandable. And of course, he's taking like interest in MaoMao's safety because he's like, you need to go to the infirmary. And she's like, oh, it's fine. She's like, I just want more poison soup. Can you get me some more? And she's like, the poison could have coursed through my body by now. And he's like, this isn't funny. And she's like, give me the rest of the soup. And he's like, you're an idiot. And she's like, I want to improve my poison detecting skills. And he's like, oh my God. He's like, someone tested the soup and collapsed. He's like, now's not the time. And she's like, well, I've got this medicine. And he's like, oh my God. He's like, why didn't you say anything? And then she's like, so do the eunuchs get hairpins as well? Well, they can from other women, but usually they're women that they're going to get married to. So, and she's like, his normal glitter is gone. And so she imagines that he was, approached by somebody else. No, buddy. Approached by somebody else at the party. But the reality is he's just worried about her. And MaoMao's too oblivious to know that he's worried about her. So it's like, nope. And she makes note that the way he acts makes him appear both more mature, but also, no, go away, but also younger than he normally is. And she likes that look about him. I feel like MaoMao likes when he drops the facade of trying to do the smolder and trying to be like but this, like when he drops the facade and he's himself, that's when she likes him the most. And that's what we're seeing right now with him, is that it's who he actually is, right? She's like, I prefer him like this when he's more serious, which is great because we have MaoMao who is, serious at times, but then she also is kind of like very gremlin-like and playful. And then you have Jinshi who acts very gremlin-like and playful, but is actually more serious. So they're foils to each other, and they don't realize that they enjoy each other's foils. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So my dog is asking me to play with him with this toy that's down here. So there we go. And my other dog was laying on top of the toy. So ridiculous. So she's like, wow. She's like, this infirmary's got some good drugs. She's Walter Whiting it up here. She's like, it'd be really shame if I got some access to these drugs. I'm like, damn it. I feel like Gaoshun is the one I'm going to feel the worst for over the course of this series. Because I feel like it's going to be MaoMao and Jinshi back and forth with each other. And everybody else around them is going to realize what's up, except for those two. And Gaoshun's going to be in the center of it. It's going to be like, sorry, man. So she ends up dispelling all the poison out of her body. She's like, oh, yep, all empty. Our girl MaoMao is built different. She is something else. And Jinshi's like, oh my God, really? And like, so let's talk about who poisoned the concubine. And she's like, yeah, let's bring forth Li Shu and the lady in waiting so that we can make sure she knows. So basically, the food was switched. And Li Shu got a dish that she wasn't supposed to have. And Gokyoku was getting a dish that she wasn't supposed to have. So I feel like somebody was trying to poison Li Shu and make it look like an accident because it was just fish, which is something that wasn't necessarily poisoned, but she was allergic to it, so she would have had a reaction. And Li Shu knows that she's allergic. So Jinshi greets her with all the sparkles, and MaoMao's like, oh, there's the sparkles. And they talk about, you know, what allergies are, basically. And she's like, I had a similar reaction to buckwheat, so I know what that's like. But I do think it's important that MaoMao brings up the idea of the allergies, because that's something that MaoMao's like, I couldn't build up a tolerance to it. She's like, it wasn't like the poisons that I practice on my body. I can build a tolerance up to them. Usually, I mean, there's some people that do therapy with allergies where they try to build up a tolerance with it, and sometimes it is successful, but other times it's not. And as you get older, a lot of times allergies get worse and worse as you age. So it could be something lethal to Li Shu as she gets older. If she eats a piece of fish, it may block off her throat and she can't breathe and she'll just asphyxiate and die. So that's kind of the problem. That's the thing. She's like, MaoMao's like, I take the buckwheat thing seriously because if I can't breathe, an antidote ain't going to help. They don't have EpiPens just lying around in the Imperial Palace for her to use. She's like, I took a long time to heal from that. You know, if you didn't have a Benadryl laying around, it'd be a problem. And so she's like, it's clear the rear palace prepared the food for the garden party, but there was a different ingredient than normal in the vinegar dish. So they swapped yours with Lady Gyokyo's by mistake. And it's mackerel you can't have. And the lady in waiting slowly figures out that MaoMao knows what's up. And MaoMao is like onto her. And she's like, yeah, this could be a problem. So I want to make sure that, you know, we're clear that if, you know, somebody was intentionally giving Lady Li Shu something she was allergic to, it'd be the same thing as poisoning in her. And if the emperor found out you were poisoning one of his concubines, that would be a big problem. So I just like that she slowly builds it up as she's talking to the lady in waiting. And the moment she hands her that packet and is like, hey, I'm making sure you know, here's what happens in case of an emergency. And the moment she hands it to her and she takes it and we see the lady in waiting sweating, I knew when they cut to MaoMao's face, it was going to look devious. And she just looks like her eyes are on, like, I love how her face has this like shadow and glow to it. It's almost ethereal. She looks like freaking Galadriel from Lord of the Rings when she's like at full power. She just looks like she's like, don't F it up. And I'm like, ah, MaoMao when she's scary, I love it. I love it. And she's like, okay. And Jinshi's like, did you suspect her? Is that why you gave her the emergency kit? And MaoMao's like, I can't say anything. I'm just a lady in waiting. I know if I allege something or make a claim and it's not true, I'll be the one to suffer. So she's like, I'm not saying anything. I'm just putting it out there, you know, if the hypothetical situation were to happen, you know, here's what you do. And I like Jinshi puts his arm on, like his hand on her shoulder and she like flits it away. And she's like, oh, I'm of lowly birth. Please don't touch me. And he's like, He's like, what? He's like, you're the only one that says that to me. And she's like, well, everybody else is just being kind to you. I love that. She's like, everybody else is being nice to you because you're hot. She's like, not me. And he's like, fine. I love it. And he's like, well, will you at least answer me if you think it was her? And she's like, well, she's like, was the target Lady Li Shu? And she's like, assuming none of the other dishes were poisoned, probably. And then she leaves. And of course, Gaoshun is like, is this still related to the fireworks? And Jinshi's like, something is still up. The lady in waiting had no burns on her. And he's like, who could it be? So, I don't know. Is our boy Bokudo, is he responsible for the fireworks shenanigans? Is it him? Is it someone he's connected to and they're just going to use him up as a pawn? I don't know. He's going to have something. That little hairpin that he gave her is going to have some kind of meaning later on. And we're going to have to come back to him at some point. Maybe not next episode, but at some point it's all going to tie back around. But as far as Lady Li Shu goes, I feel like she's being targeted for poisoning because she's young and it seems like she'd be easy to pick off maybe, and she has ties to the previous emperor. I don't know. Obviously, Gyokyo is a target because of her political ties. Lady Li Hua, I mean, she was a target perhaps because she had a son. Oh. The thing is, we haven't seen the brother in all of this, which is fascinating to me. I want to meet the younger brother who's sickly, who didn't show up, oddly enough, and see what his deal is. And then I feel kind of bad for Jinshi, if I'm honest, because Jinshi, it's very apparent now that he is considerate of MaoMao, and he feels for her, and he wants to be protective of her. MaoMao's like, I don't need no man, I'm good. And she also seems kind of oblivious. But also now, I mean, Li Hua's pin, her hairpin's fine. She's just giving it as a token of thanks to MaoMao. But this little spry Labrador of a man has come up to give her this, hairpin. And the thing of it is, it's like, is Jinshi going to be like, why did you accept his hairpin? Am I not good enough? And MaoMao's like, we're not dating. And she's like, I'm not dating him either. I just like these hairpins. And he's like, I wonder too if maybe the Labrador boy is being set up because he didn't want to watch, or maybe he's a secret villain. I don't know. He didn't want to watch any of them eat the food, so maybe he knew there was going to be poison involved. It doesn't seem likely, though. I feel like he is innocent. I think we're meant to maybe believe that he has something to do with it, but it's going to be a red herring. I don't know. Hopefully, the one lady in waiting for Li Shu learned her lesson and doesn't try to keep poisoning her because MaoMao kind of called her out. So, yeah. But MaoMao's just out here collecting hairpins like the Pokemon League badges. She's just going to go see the Elite Four in about 5 days. She needs about 5 more hairpins and she's ready to go. She can maintain a level 60 Charizard without any problem. But I do love MaoMao and Jinshi's dynamic, how it's growing. I love MaoMao's serious face. Like, now MaoMao has, like, this childlike innocence, but she also has this, like, kind of seductress look when she's eating poison, like girls having a literal orgasm here on stage. And then she has her, like devil look, like, mess with me, F around and find out face is what she basically gave that lady in waiting as she was giving her the emergency manual on how to handle allergies if they get out of hand. So yeah, I want to know more about the Dowager Empress as well, but we're only on episode 6. It's crazy to believe that this is like at the 1/4 mark, a fourth of the way through season 1. I hate that already because I'm really enjoying the series and I don't want it to be over, but we've got season 2 in the wings. It's fine. But I'm super excited now to see episode 7 because it's apparently a 3-parter. We got to wrap up this firework mystery somehow, right? So I'm going to be reading the next segment of The Last Eunuch in China and talking about it, but I'm excited to hear your comments down below. In any case, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with more of the Apothecary Diaries. Bye!